Hey, welcome back to another installment of the Wide Right Podcast. I'm Manny Navarro, Miami Hurricanes beat writer for The Athletic. It's been a minute. I know you've seen Carlos Ledo on there. We haven't seen him since Cinco de Mayo. Carlos, thanks for coming off the I don't want to call it the DL, but the vacation list, so to
That
speak.
might be not a coincidence, but not a coincidence that I haven't been on since Cinco de Mayo. It was a rough one. Not just kidding. I treat Cinco de Mayo with great care after having an episode 20 years ago where, long story short, I ended up on a friend's couch with a Mexican hat on, a shot glass on a string around my neck, and lots of dried vomit on my shirt. So I am not partaking in Cinco de Mayo anymore.
Yeah, I hadn't done a show since June 22nd with Frank Tucker from Canes Country Rivals website for Miami. We were talking about recruiting then because Miami was sort of busy hosting all these big time kids in the month of June on official visits. The recruiting class wasn't doing that great then, but it's picked up a lot of speed of late. And I know you and I don't talk a ton of recruiting, but I got to acknowledge it because this is my first podcast since June 22nd.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
we are going to pick up the pace, by the way, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to be at the ACC kickoff media event next week in Charlotte, so I have plenty to come back and talk to you about. But as
We
far
got
as
to start
my
getting limber, baby. The season on the horizon. Got to get a little limber.
practice is on Tuesday, August 1st. That's when they get rolling, brother. So we're going to have lots to talk about here as the summer wears off. But look, Miami's recruiting's got a lot better since we got into July. Miami picked up five-star wide receiver JoJo Trader recently, top 100 edge rusher Marquise Lightfoot out of the Chicago area, and a four-star D tackle in Artavius Jones out of Bluntstown, Florida. Bluntstown, of course, up in the Panhandle type area, closer to FSU than Miami, one of FSU good recruit in their backyard that Miami was able to go get. He's a big kid, 6'4", 305. I know how much you love D tackles and how important that has been to Miami's past. But they
Yeah,
got
and from what I've heard, the kid is extremely athletic. He plays basketball too. He's lined up at
Mhm.
receiver. He's done a bunch of stuff. I've read some stuff on him on 24/7. Shout out to Gabby and David Lake. They do a great job as well over there, keeping me informed whenever I have time to come up and submerge from all the stuff I'm doing this summer. It's been a mix of work and enjoying the summer. So I've kind of been like Hannah Montana, enjoying the best of both worlds. But I'm back, baby.
we're back. That's right. So yeah, look, I mean, they're up to 14th in the country now in those team rankings. They've got 18 commitments. The big one for me was JoJo Trader. We had talked about the wide receiver
Hmm.
position. I like the kids that they brought in last class. JoJo Trader is on another level compared to those guys. I mean, Robbie Washington is a good receiver. Nathaniel Joseph, very good receiver. I think Nathaniel Joseph's got a little bit of that Santana Moss in him. But JoJo Trader is a true number one guy. In fact, I honestly think of the two positions, I love him even more at cornerback. He's the kind of guy to me who could be a first round pick at corner. He's just so good. His ball skills are so good, reading passes, knowing how to make adjustments, and then to make the catch. I've never seen him really drop a pass. This kid is just ridiculously talented. 6'1", 175. Okay, he's not 6'4", 220, but he's certainly to me at the wide receiver position today. He's fast. He's a playmaker. He's very, very good. And to me, that was probably the most important pickup so far of the Mario Cristobal era because it's a receiver in his backyard. And Carlos,
Yeah.
you know how many talented guys have left South Florida at that receiver position.
Yeah, and they really haven't had a guy that can go up and consistently make contested catches and track balls down since maybe Almon Richards, really, right?
Mm-hmm.
They've had guys in here who can flash, who have shown the ability to do it here and there, but then they can't make the simple plays. Kind of like Jacoby George, Romello Brinson had his moments where he flashed here and there before he left. But now I think this kind of a recruit not only helps because of the talent, but I think it helps because it shows that Miami can go out and get a frontline guy at the receiver position under Mario Cristobal, which had been a question for some time since Mario came on board, where they've missed on a bunch of guys. And then hopefully this leads to additional guys coming on board. I mean, he's got a great connection to the Miami Gardens Ravens, played with a lot of great, talented guys, has a really talented teammate with him, and Jeremiah Smith, that maybe he could bring over as well, decommit from Ohio State and bring over to Miami. Maybe some other guys from that team that are highly talented that play other places can come over as well. At the very least, it gives them some cachet to say, listen, we're getting frontline guys in our backyard at positions where we have not traditionally recruited well here over the last 10, 12 years. And we're changing that sort of narrative. And if you look at the roster, how it's coming together between this past recruiting class and the one they're putting together now, if you project 3-4 years down the road, you're looking at a very talented, versatile offensive football team, very versatile defensive football team, There's still holes on the roster today, but at least they're building something out and building a more talented roster down the road if the kids stay.
That's right. Yeah, if they stick and if Miami has a good season, they've got to me they got to win 8 games, at least 8 games this year to probably keep the majority of this recruiting class together. Sometimes kids flip for whatever reason. In the end, you want to keep this class somewhere in the top 15 in terms of talent, accumulation. Obviously, the transfer portal is always big in the offseason. And you know what? Since the last time we talked, Miami's added some guys to the
Yeah, they went on a
roster.
shopping spree.
They went on a little bit of a post-spring shopping spree, picking some guys up. Today, though, the news was that one of the guys that had been on the roster, a four-star cornerback, Chris Graves, out of the Fort Myers area, he's actually the first player to enter the transfer portal since the end of the spring for Miami. So, you're going to have some departures because you got to get to 85 come the end of August. By the time the season starts, by the time school starts, you got to get to 85. I did the math, Carlos. You and I did the math here together on air
Well,
before
you
we
did
got
the
went on
math,
air.
and I just watched.
You just watched me do the math. I counted 43 scholarships on offense, 3 quarterbacks, 6 running backs, 6 tight ends, 11 receivers, and 17 offensive linemen. And then I counted 41 on defense, 16 defensive linemen, 11 linebackers, 9 cornerbacks, 5 safeties. And then, of course, you have your kicker and your punter that are also on scholarships. So when you do that math, it comes out to 86. I've seen some people speculating online that it might be closer to 88. I know Mario Cristobal's nephew, Luke Cristobal, was one of those off-season pickups, but I don't know if Lou is actually paying for a scholarship or if he gets the family discount. I don't know how that works. But ultimately, look, Miami's got to get to 85, so I expect there'll probably be a few more guys that decide to enter the transfer portal here that we'll hear announcements about it. Last week, I'd heard you might see some among the linebackers. You got 11 linebackers. Only 2 of them end up playing a whole lot in this defense. So I think ultimately you'll probably see some departures there. I wouldn't be surprised if there's an offensive lineman in that group too as well. Miami will get to 85 one way or the other. Mario's, I'm pretty sure, on top of it. So, but look, let's get into a little bit of this roster and some of the pickups from the offseason, Carlos, because the last time you and I spoke, we knew Miami needed to go out and get some help at some spots. What were you most concerned about before Miami went shopping during the post spring?
I mean, we had talked about it. I wouldn't say the most concerned, but I think the one position that we discussed that a lot of people were like, "Why? Why are you concerned about that position? Why do you want to add somebody else?" It didn't really make sense to them. They didn't think Mario would do it. Was running back, and they went out and they did it because, as you know, you're always just one snap away at running back from being short on depth, and we saw that last season, and we've seen it the last couple seasons really with guys going down. So the fact that they added AJ Allen from Nebraska to add another body into that running back room, along with the freshman recruits and Mark Fletcher and Christopher Johnson. It really speaks to me that Mario wants to have an insurance policy there of a veteran guy that can come in and play right away and not have to wait on Mark Fletcher to develop or Christopher Johnson to develop, not have to see if Don Chaney Jr. is going to come back healthy or Trevante Citizen, and really add depth there. So you're basically counting right away in 2 veterans in Henry Parrish and a Jay Allen, and seeing what the other guys do, where they come back from injury, or if they're able to grasp a playbook quick enough and get on the field quick enough, which we know Mark Fletcher is really talented. But if you could save him and not have to beat him up as a freshman and let him get acclimated and then really let him springboard into next season, that'd be great if you have enough in front of him. So that to me was a great addition. We talked about, needing help in the secondary. They went out and got that. They got a couple of guys in the secondary at corner. Starting with Jaden Davis with our last podcast that we discussed. They also added Jedi Richard from Vanderbilt, who's a solid corner. They lost your boy Terry Roberts from Iowa, came in really quick, had a cup of coffee, latched to the spring and got out. He backed it up, Terry, and he's out of here. But those were concerns. One of the areas that we really wanted to see them address was, additional depth at linebacker, defensive tackle. And they added a couple guys at defensive tackle, not world beaters, just a little bit more size to add some more depth, which I think was necessary. They added a earlier in the transfer portal a 197-year-old tight end Cam McCormick to add some blocking depth. I really love the addition, obviously, of the offensive lineman and Matt Lee and Javian Cohen. Those were great additions early in the transfer portal. So they've kept working. They've kept adding bodies and adding talent. And at the end of the day, even if these guys aren't frontline players, they could be rotational guys, and it adds competition. It adds talent to the roster. It helps build the roster out because this roster has been so unbalanced and the depth has been so crazy over the last few years that if someone goes down on that first group, you really don't have anybody behind them that you can trust, and then it becomes just a general shit show all the way around. We've seen that a lot. I don't think they're big at the defensive tackle still after these additions. They're going to have to use their quickness, like we talked about. They've got two very athletic guys in Leonard Taylor and Jared Harrison Hunt there, and the guys behind them are not as big. Also, that they're going to have to use their athleticism. They're going to have some really good guys coming off the edge, as we know. They've upgraded the linebacker position, obviously, with Francis Mauigoa and Nigel E. Kelly. I'm sorry, Wesley Basainth, looking to be a starter this year and step into that role. And you have Corey Flagg, an experienced guy behind them. But to me, the one position where I wish they also would have added somebody else to add some depth because of the departures now is safety. I think, obviously they've got two All-American caliber safeties, one All-American, another guy has the talent to be an All-American, James Williams, but they don't have much behind them. I don't know what that's going to look like moving forward. You've got some inexperienced guys behind those guys. If you have an injury there, or you have a guy miss some time like James Williams has in the last couple seasons, it could get a little dicey back there on the back end.
Yeah, I mean, I think they like Markeith Williams, who was a freshman last year. He's got a good body, 6'2", 175. I think he's put on some weight since whatever it is that Miami lists him there at. They've got Brian Balaam, who's been in the program now. This is going on 4 years. Balaam had entered the portal, came back. So they've got guys that aren't
They've got
true
bodies,
freshmen. Right. The guy, though, that I think ultimately down the road that projects really well is Caleb Spencer, who they kind of picked out of Virginia, the true freshman. I watched him out at camp, and to me, he was just as impressive physically as James Williams. I mean, not as long, not as tall, but he looked like a vulturing type safety who could sprout in the next year or two into a really, big physical guy back there when James Williams leaves. So,
this
but
is why you're a journalist. Your use of language, vulturing and sprouting. You've hit me with a 1-2 combination there of just wordsmithery. I like it.
I like the kid. I like the way he looked out there. I thought, this was a good sort of pickup. He was only a 3-star kid who's ranked in the 700s. I thought, okay, this is good work by Miami's recruiting department. Jamil Adai, the safeties and DB coach, a guy, to be able to recognize somebody in the recruiting process that they liked. And look, I think Jadaeus Richards going to help at the cornerback position. He's a guy who played some at Vanderbilt last year. I know, you say Miami, why is Miami taking a Vanderbilt guy? Well, he's 6'2", 197, and he's fast, and he was a 4-star recruit coming out of high school. He's got some respect on his name, so to speak, and he played in the SEC. And so I like the take. I mean, Miami's cornerback room to me remains the one area I'm most concerned about going into the season. I know for you it's D tackle. I don't like the depth of D tackle. I wish there was more. But cornerback, I want to see who's going to prove it to me. Who's going to step up and be a true number one cornerback? That to
Yep.
me is the weakness of this football team. So but all in all, I thought Mario did address some needs. We will see going into camp. There will certainly be some interesting storylines, position by position, and we can talk about it more when we get to some of our mailbag questions. But Carlos, I wanted to get into one of the stories I wrote recently on Tyler Van Dyke. I had a chance during the NBA Finals in June, right after Miami fell behind 3-1 to Denver. I drove
Why do you
out
have
to.
to open up old wounds, Manny? Why do you have to mention that fact?
I
Like
apologize.
all you had to say was it was during the NBA Finals. That was it.
That's all I had to say. You're right. Well, anyway, I went out there that Saturday, um, when Miami was a lot of their guys, Tyler Van Dyke, a lot. I think it was about 12 of the kids represented by Drew Rosenhaus. We're doing a football camp up in Vero Beach, and I thought, okay, this is the perfect opportunity. I'm gonna go up there, get a lot of one-on-ones, get a chance to talk to some of these guys, and that's what happened. I got a chance to talk to Tyler Van Dyke. I spoke with Colby Young, who I think is going to be his number one target this year on the outside and a big part of this Miami offense. I talked to some other guys that were there, Elijah Arroyo, who's coming back from that season-ending injury. Jalen Rivers was there. I mean, there were a lot of, Drew certainly knows how to pick the best players on the
Yeah.
Miami roster to represent. And so I got a chance to talk with a lot of good ones there. But really, I ended up writing this story on Tyler Van Dyke because, as you remember, Carlos, right after spring football, there was rumors that he might be transferring to Alabama, that he was going to
Yep.
take off and leave, and everybody was panicking. And then all of a sudden, we get a tweet about him being fully committed to Miami. I just wanted to get the real story. I wanted to kind of know where Tyler's head was at, right? Because it's never a good sign after spring football to have those kind of rumors surface. I came away, and you read the story. I came away feeling like if there was a moment when Tyler was thinking about leaving, it was right after the season when Mario hadn't hired an offensive coordinator and he was nervous, rightfully so, about what they were going to do with this offense after the mess that Josh Gaddis and that group had created this past season. But once he went through spring football and had a chance to hang out with Shannon Dawson, his new coordinator, and went bowling with Shannon and kind of shot the shit with him. I think he realized, hey man, I like this guy a lot, and I really want to play here. And so, while the Alabama stuff I think was true, certainly that they were looking for quarterback help, I didn't ever get the sense from speaking to Tyler for half an hour that he ever really was going to do it, that he was going to leave Miami. I think he was sort of bought in after spring football, after what he was able to go through. Certainly, I think he put his body on the line for Miami last season,
Yeah.
playing through a major major pain in his shoulder, an AC joint sprain, a grade 3 sprain. He tried to tough it out. I don't think you can question his heart. I don't think you can question where his mind was. I think he's just trying to make the best decision for himself. And in the end, Miami and Mario Cristobal did what they had to do to keep him back when they hired Shannon Dawson.
Yeah, and I think it speaks a lot to Tyler's character that, although he entertained leaving to Alabama, because obviously, listen, at the end of the day, if you're in an environment that is detrimental to you, to your career, to your health, even because of the way, as we saw, his season ended, you're going to explore other opportunities as much as you love where you're at. It's just natural. It's human nature. You've got to look out for yourself because at the end of the day, especially this guy now in college where he's got a short window of trying to make the NFL and make a difference and make a life, grab a life-changing opportunity for him and his family moving forward. He's got to do what's best for him. But at the end of the day, he decided to stay in Miami. He trusted Mario. He trusted the hire in Shannon Dawson. And it proved not only through his desire to get back on the field after his initial injury, to get back to Florida and for the Florida State game, to stay after everything, to hang in here and decide to be the leader of this football team going forward, and trust the process and trust Mario Cristobal that he is a loyal guy, that he is a leader, and I think that will only help him moving forward in terms of galvanizing the offense and the guys on this team to lead them forward this season. Now the question becomes: is does the performance on the field translate as well? I think based on the type of offense that we're going to see, which is very similar, ironically, to what happened with Miami when they had Dan Enos. We're going from one disastrous offense to another sort of run and shoot offshoot, and a little bit more free wielding and open offense after that disaster, which is where Tyler thrived under Rhett Lashley. And I think he's going to be very comfortable in it. And I think the fact that, as we talked about in the transfer portal, not only did the Hurricanes add those guys we talked about, they added a couple receivers, right? They added playmakers for Tyler Van Dyke to try and help him, spread that ball around and do what he does best, which is push the ball vertically. So they landed Tyler Harrell and Shamar Clerk. Tyler Harrell obviously was one of the fastest guys in the country out of South Florida when he was coming out of high school. Big playability. Shamar Kirk's supposed to be another big play guy as well. So they've added guys around him that fit Tyler's style, the way he plays, the way he likes to play, and I think that's going to help him a lot. So we'll see what it ends up being in this season. But at the very least, he's got his confidence back. It seems like because of the offense, he's seen that they're building, some good talent around him in terms of the offensive skill sets. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and I was going to add, I think the other important element to all this is, Shannon Dawson, I think, trusts him to make the kind of plays and decisions at the line of scrimmage that Rhett Lashley used to trust him doing. And that's, if it means rerouting a receiver. If Tyler sees something, an opening on the defense, because he's sitting there reading the defense and he wants to change a route of one of his outside or inside receivers, he's got the freedom to do that now. If they're in a running play and he sees, hey man, the defense is shaded this way, they're all over it, they know what they're doing, he can flip the direction of the running play. He can switch out of it, run a pass play. That's the kind of stuff he wasn't able to do with Josh Gaddis as his coordinator. Now, I will say this: Tyler told me he liked Josh Gaddis a lot, that they got along well. I know there was the rumors out there that maybe he wasn't, they just didn't get along. Tyler liked what he was doing. In fact, you go back and you look at Miami's offense in the North Carolina game and the Virginia Tech game, it was obvious at that point, before Tyler got hurt, that him and Gaddis were on the same page. They were, I mean, he had two monster games in the middle of the
Yeah,
season, and you're like, man, maybe they finally turned the corner. But unfortunately, Tyler got banged up, ended up missing the Virginia game, and never was himself again the rest of the way. And I think ultimately, look, things might have turned out differently for Gaddis in Miami, but the change was needed, the change was made, and now he's got a coordinator who he feels like really trusts him and allows him to be who he was in Rhett Lashley's offense 2 years ago, when he was certainly one of the best quarterbacks in the country. 20 touchdowns, 3 picks over his last 6 games, over 300 yards in each of those games. Now, look, I do want to get into this a little bit, Carlos. I know Miami fans are thinking of this air raid offense, and they're probably thinking to themselves, man, Manny, you sound like Tyler's going to throw for 300 yards a game now every single game. I don't think that's the case. I think as long as Mario Cristobal is in charge of this football team, they're gonna run the football. There's gonna be offensive balance, and I think Tyler's okay with that. I think he knows he's gonna throw the football a lot, but I didn't get the sense from our conversation that he doesn't want to play in a balanced offense. I think he wants there to be some balance, because he certainly wants to not have everybody coming, head hunting and trying to kill him
exactly.
every time he drops back to throw a pass.
Not only that, but he knows that play action sets up big plays, right? And that allows him to read cleaner windows, to throw to more open guys, and to push the ball down the field like he likes to do. So if you've got a running game that has to be respected, that means the defense has to commit more guys in the box, which means there's less guys on the back end to defend. So you're going to find more one-on-one matchups, which is what he wants to do. And like you were talking about, I think it's critical, especially in today's game, that the quarterback is an extension of the offensive coordinator on the field. If the quarterback has to understand and know the scheme, not just from an X's and O standpoint, but from a philosophical standpoint, as well as the offensive coordinator, to be able to get them in the right plays and see what the defense does and know how to counter that, and to be able to have that freedom. Because at the end of the day, especially if you're up in the booth, once you make that play call, it's gone, and it's now in the hands of the quarterback. If the quarterback can then adjust that and get you to an even better play based on the defensive look, then at the end of the day, you're going to have more success on offense, and you're not going to have more games like that Virginia game where Miami won 3-2 on a pass ball in the ninth inning. Actually, the 11th inning. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah. That was an ugly football game. Look, I expect this Miami team to be better. I expect Tyler to put up more numbers. I think that alone will help them get to 8 wins, Carlos.
Yeah,
I think,
look, I think 3,200 yards and 30 touchdowns to me would be something reasonable.
yeah, I don't think it's out of the ordinary to predict something like that for Tyler this coming season, if he's healthy and able to play in all 12 regular season games. I will say this: he showed me a shoulder. Okay, he said, "Come check this out," and there was a bump. And part of the AC joint sprain, I guess, and he didn't have surgery on it or anything. You end up with that bump there for pretty much the rest of your life. And I was like, wow, that's weird. But I read up on this. A lot of quarterbacks have had AC joint injury. You played the quarterback, but did you ever end up injuring your shoulder when you played?
Thankfully, no. No,
Okay.
I've only injured it later on. Not AC joint, but a little bit of the rotator cuff as an older guy doing stupid shit.
All right. Well, thankfully you didn't end up with that bump there in the shoulder. But we'll see that with Tyler if he's ever out there shirtless throwing some passes
Yeah, he might end up looking like
pregame.
Quasimodo later on in life. But hey, listen, it was worth it early on.
Well, listen, a couple more stories that I worked on, then we're going to jump into the mailbag. Just wanted to tell you about it. I interviewed Colby Young. I mentioned that I'll have a story on him coming out in the Athletic at some point soon. In addition to my coverage from the ACC kickoff, another story that'll be coming out. I know this is a big topic for Miami fans because they're frustrated with Miami's position in the ACC grant of rights, the fact that they're locked into this TV deal through 2036, and that financially the Hurricanes are going to fall behind with everybody else in the ACC, behind the SEC and the Big Ten. And so my editors at the Athletic love doing these realignment revisited series where they go back and they look at some interesting stories from back in the day. One of my editors, Matt Brown, suggested, he says, well, why don't we find out if Miami really ever had a chance, them and Florida State, if they ever had a chance to join the SEC. And I told you the other night, Carlos, when you and I were talking off air, said they did. They had an opportunity in 1990, and I think it's a story that most people are unaware of. Um, the SEC, and I'll give a brief little synopsis here, and you and I can get into a conversation. But the SEC in 1990, that's when they decided to expand. Believe it or not, it was actually a year earlier in '89 when the conversation first began. And at that point in 1989, the SEC was looking to turn into a super conference. The teams that they wanted to add: Miami, who had just won the national title, of course, Florida State, um, South Carolina. Those were going to be their three teams in the East, and then they were going to go out and get Arkansas, Texas, and Texas A&M. Well, guess what? They've got four of the six now. Who are the two
Yep.
that they don't have? Miami and Florida State. And I think back in the late 80s, early 90s, everybody in the country probably would have loved to have Miami and Florida State in their conference because the amount of money and attention they were going to bring. Times have obviously changed. Miami's fallen off from the dominant power they were. Florida State has as well.
Yeah, they made the big move of playing in the Big East.
Right. Yeah, Miami ultimately ended up picking the Big East, and a lot of that I think had to do with basketball. But as I came to research, Carlos, and those of you who are listening to this want to check out the story in the Athletic, Miami and the SEC go back to the 1930s. Okay, when the SEC actually began in 1932, Miami was an independent in 1941. They had administrators attending SEC meetings for over 25 years, and Florida was actually trying to help Miami get into the SEC back in the day. So, anyway, I thought it was a fascinating sort of research project for me. I told you how much I love doing those in the off season, but to read some of those stories, and in the end, Carlos, just to make a long story short, Florida State was the team that the SEC really prioritized in 1990. That's who they wanted to come join. And Florida State ultimately gave the SEC double middle fingers because the ACC came along with their great basketball conference and their academic connections, and ultimately convinced the Seminoles that the best place for them was the ACC. ACC only took one team then. Bobby Bowden actually fought for Miami to get in the ACC. And the ACC didn't want to take Miami. They weren't interested. They only wanted to expand by one. Miami, of course, eventually ended up in the ACC, but interesting history lesson. And I guess my question to you after all of that spiel, Carlos, is did you think Miami made a mistake by going to the Big East and not the
Wow.
SEC then?
This sort of reminds me of if you've ever heard of the story of the Lost Superman movie. Have you heard
Yes.
about it? Where Nicolas Cage was going to play Superman
Okay.
and Tim Burton was going to be the director. So they had even done like screen testing like of Nicolas Cage in a Superman costume that was so weird. And he had the long mullet Nicolas Cage type hair and like The Rock. It was weird, man. And that was a Superman movie that they were planning on making and it just didn't come to fruition. What would have been if Superman had Nicolas Cage played him? Anyway, yeah, I mean, you think they made the wrong decision? I mean, you think going with the Big East and playing the likes of Rutgers and everybody else that they were playing during that time period was a bad choice over taking the SEC? I think at the end of the day, maybe being in the Big East allowed Miami a little bit more flexibility in terms of their schedule. Because you know how it is with the SEC, you're probably going to have one or two non-conference games that you could schedule in there. They're going to have to both be probably cream puffs just because your schedule is so tough. So I think Miami wanted a little bit more flexibility, and that might have maybe it would have reduced their non-conference schedule to one game because it would have added Florida State
Yep.
to keep the rivalry going, and it just probably wasn't enough in terms of flexibility. And apparently to them, the SEC wasn't a good enough basketball conference. They preferred the Big East. But I mean, at the end of the day, you had teams like Kentucky winning national championships in the SEC. You had Florida having a great run in the SEC in basketball. So I mean, at the end of the day, it is what it is. But maybe hopefully the door swings back open again one more time, and this time Miami doesn't shun the SEC for another crappy conference.
Yeah, it might not be to the 100-year anniversary of Miami first trying to get in the SEC in the mid 1930s,
Hey man,
but
there's always hope.
you never know. You never know. I think the Big Ten is where Miami will end up eventually. All right, Carlos. Let's talk about the mailbag. Let's get into it. There's just a few questions, and then we're gonna wrap this puppy up. I appreciate you doing this with me, but the reality is the news will pick up starting next week when we've got some media availability. We got some practices. Everything will pick up. We'll have much more here on Wide Right. But let's get into the mailbag. The first question comes from Sam Knowlton. What's the status of Trevante Citizen? Running back seems to be the most injured position in football, so I'm concerned with depth in that room after a few weeks. All right, Sam, here's what I know about Trevante Citizen, what I've said on this podcast before. I've been told that there was a very good likelihood that he could end up missing 2 seasons because of this knee injury and how serious it was. Remember, he was injured in fall camp a year ago. So his body is just beginning to get around to that full year post major knee injury. So he may be delayed at the start of camp. Now, I know there's been other reports out there. Somebody else called out to me recently and said, I'm hearing Citizen is good. He's going to be ready to go. Look, the bottom line is information is scarce. Miami we will see whether or not Trevante Citizen is out there for the first practice. But if you ask me, based on the conversations I had in the past, I'm not expecting him to be ready for the start of fall camp. In fact, I would expect Miami to kind of care for him and with kid gloves. And the fact that they went out and got AJ Allen,
Exactly.
as we talked about earlier, to me tells me that Mario obviously feels like running back depth needed a boost. They got 6 scholarship guys now, so I wouldn't be surprised if they bring back Citizen very slow when he's ready to come back. All right. This is another question, and Carlos, you can jump in on this one from David Hernandez. Which transfer edition are you excited to see come camp?
You know what? Because they're more recent, I'd like to see what Tyler Harrell and Shamar Kirk bring to the table. If they can give Miami and give Tyler Van Dyke that additional guy on the outside that can burn, that could get deep, that can make catches on a consistent basis, whether it be down the field or underneath, and make plays in open spaces, to give that compliment to Colby Young, which I think they need. I think that's what they're really lacking, is that other guy opposite Colby Young that can burn, that can make plays, but also make the simple plays and be consistent with making catches, which they haven't had. And Jacoby George has flashed, like we said, but he's been inconsistent catching the football. Isaiah Horton didn't pan out last year. He didn't get a chance to get on the field. Maybe that changes this year. We'll see, but at least they've added 2 additional guys that are playmakers that'll compete for that additional outside spot. You've already got Xavier Restrepo and Ray Joseph in the slot, along with Rashard Smith. So you've got guys that can make plays in the other spots, but you need that additional receiver on the other end. A guy that you could put, off the line of scrimmage, put in motion, move him around the field and get big plays out of that. It's similar to what North Carolina did for a couple of years with Josh Downs.
Yeah, I think if Harold is healthy, and I asked Tyler about him in our conversation, he mentioned there's no doubt he's the fastest guy on the team. I said, "How's his health?" He says he's been great all summer. So hopefully that's an encouraging sign. The main injury with Harold has been a foot injury. That's what's kind of slowed his entire career down. Those things are terrible, especially for receivers. Once they injure their feet, it's always susceptible to a setback. Hopefully, this is the year Tyler's healthy and he's able to help Miami win some games. For me, I'm going to go on the flip side. I'm going to go defense, and I'm going to bring back the cornerback position. To me, I want to see Jadais Richard, and I want to see Jaden Davis. Jaden Davis is very experienced, played a whole lot in the Big 12, didn't necessarily play great at Oklahoma. He didn't have great PFF numbers, if that matters to you, but he has a ton of experience. He's played a ton in the Big 12 against a lot of passing offenses. I think he's going to be really valuable. He's a guy who can play in the slot. I got a chance to talk to his father at Legends Camp. His father was a coach at Fort Lauderdale Dillard, coached in the city for a while, played college ball and pro ball as well. So he comes from good roots. Jaden's a smart kid. I think he's going to come in here and be one of the leaders. I think he'll probably start, but we'll see how he does. And then Jadais Richard, to me, is the talent. He's 6'2", 197, has the size, has the length. Obviously went to Vanderbilt, so he has to be smart. I want to see if those guys can really emerge and be the kind of players that Miami needs at that cornerback position. So to me, that's the spot I will be fixated on as far as when camp begins. All
At
right.
least if they're solid, right? If they're solid, if they're good, if they're average
Mhm.
or just slightly above average, you've got enough on the back end with the 2 safeties to make up for it.
Yeah. All right. Which team on Miami's schedule has improved the most since last season? This question is from David Hernandez. All right. Um, this is a tough question to answer because we're measuring improvement based on what they were a year ago. I know from the research that I have done, and I got to admit, I haven't sat here and broken down every single roster of every Miami opponent. Been busy working on stories and different things. But I will say, I think it's either Texas A&M or Florida State. I think it's either one of those two teams.
Those would have been mine too, yeah.
I think Florida State, from a depth perspective, I just finished breaking down their entire roster, so I can speak intelligently about the Seminoles. Upgraded at wide receiver. I think they're probably the deepest team Miami will face at defensive tackle, and that's saying something considering how good Clemson's defensive line has been over the years. I think they have one of the most experienced quarterbacks in the country back in Jordan Travis, who's a nightmare. He's kind of a De'Aaron King to me, the way he kind of plays the game.
Well,
Uh,
and not only that, but he's improved as a passer to
mhm,
at Miami's expense
yeah.
over the last couple of years, and can now really throw the deep ball. If he continues to evolve as a passer, it's going to be ugly.
And then I would say Texas A&M is the other because obviously Jimbo Fisher made some changes. He's no longer calling plays. And I would say that in itself, Texas A&M has a boatload of talent. Okay. I know some kids transferred out. I know that there were some players that they had to kind of get rid of. That roster is still super loaded, especially on the defensive line. A lot of those kids are a year older now. Miami faced a very young Texas A&M defensive line last year. These kids are going to be bigger. They're going to be stronger. That to me poses a huge problem for Miami week 2. And I also like their quarterback. They've got a good roster on offense. They've got a playmaker, wide receiver. They've got some fast running backs. I
And
think
Bobby Petrino can call plays.
Bobby Petrino is one of the best in the business at doing it. So to me, I would say Florida State and Texas A&M. I don't know that Clemson's improved that much. In fact, I would venture to say maybe they're a little worse. They've got a young quarterback who didn't look very good in the Orange Bowl game. I'm not saying Clemson is beatable. I still think they're better than Miami, but I would say they haven't improved a ton compared to Florida State and Texas A&M, who I think will be improved teams than they were a year ago.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't know about improved, but I mean another team you got to look at on the schedule that's going to be dangerous just because of their quarterback is North Carolina.
Yeah.
Drake May is a stud, and you're going into North Carolina playing against that guy again 1 year after having the season he had. You know he's going to be better this year than he was the year before, so it's going to be tough to beat Carolina.
Yeah, I agree with you. And Mac Brown has Miami's number. He just
Yep.
does. He knows how to beat him. New offensive coordinator though, so we will see how that works out for him
Yeah.
this time around. Carlos, thanks for coming on. Those of you who watched us here on YouTube, you can also listen to download the podcast wherever you download the podcast. We will be back with more coverage of Miami again. Fall practice starts August 1st. Media day in Charlotte next week on Tuesday. The Canes will be talking Tuesday, July 25th. I will be there to cover it all. Make sure you read The Athletic, subscribe to The Athletic if you can. That helps me out. And make sure you check out Carlos's podcast, the MIA All Day Pod. When was the last time you potted, my brother?
I can't believe you're throwing me under the bus like this. It's been a while myself also, but I'm going to start doing more stuff now that the season's coming along.
Okay.
One of the things I wanted to do is do a schedule breakdown, look at the opponents, see, talk about their best players, what I think is going to happen more or less, and go from there.
All right. Well, make sure you follow Carlos at MIA. Go ahead. You give it.
Well, the one I usually use the most is my personal one. It's EL Ledo Ledo 1307,
Okay.
and also at MIA All Day Pod.
There you go. Make sure you check out both of those on social media. Follow Carlos, and make sure to stay with us here at the Wide Right Podcast. Subscribe if you haven't already. We'll be back with more coverage soon.
Peace.